After 10 years of marriage, he left me for a younger woman. Now I'm engaged to her dad. Funny how life works out sometimes, isn't it? Like a cosmic joke where I finally get to deliver the punchline. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind to 6 months ago, when my perfectly adequate life imploded. Picture this. Me, walking into my own living room on a random Tuesday evening, still in my work clothes, carrying Chinese takeout like some sitcom wife. Except the laugh track didn't kick in when I found my husband Derek's laptop open on the coffee table, with a chat window that might as well have been labeled "Evidence of Betrayal" in flashing neon letters. I wasn't snooping, I swear. The messages just glowed at me, like they wanted to be seen. Her name was Brittany. Of course it was Brittany. With an I instead of an E, because God forbid anything about my husband's mistress be conventional. 23 years old to my 38. A yoga instructor with, I kid you not, an Instagram account dedicated to her journey toward mindfulness. The irony of her mindfully fucking my husband wasn't lost on me. My stomach dropped like I'd just hit the first fall on a roller coaster, except there was no exhilarating rush afterward, just nausea and this strange buzzing in my ears that drowned out everything else. The takeout bag slipped from my fingers, landing with a sad little thud on our beige carpet. The carpet I'd vacuumed just that morning. I still remember staring at the soy sauce seeping into those pristine fibers, thinking how it would leave a stain that would never completely come out. Kind of like what was happening to my marriage. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. Instead, I sat down and read every single message while methodically eating an egg roll that tasted like nothing. 4 months of conversations. 4 months of good morning texts and goodnight kisses sent through the ether while I slept next to him. 4 months of inside jokes and plans and explicit photos that seared themselves into my brain. The weird thing about betrayal? It's physically painful. Like someone reaching into your chest and squeezing your heart until it can't remember how to beat properly. My hands were ice cold, but my face felt on fire. I couldn't decide if I needed to throw up or pass out or maybe both, one after the other. I was still sitting there, surrounded by cooling takeout and scrolling through their digital affair, when Derek walked in. His face did that thing where it drops and then immediately tries to rearrange itself into innocence. Too late, buddy. Way too late. He said my name like a question. I remember thinking how strange it was that after a decade together, he could still say those 2 syllables in a way I'd never heard before. What followed was the kind of conversation that changes you at a molecular level. The kind where every cliché in the cheater's handbook gets trotted out one by one. It wasn't me, it was him. He hadn't meant for it to happen. He still loved me but wasn't in love with me. He'd been unhappy for so long. We'd grown apart. She understood him. It started as just friends. Each line hit like a slap, and I sat there taking it, wondering when exactly I'd become this person who could be lied to for months and not notice. Who was this woman with my face and my name who had been sleeping next to a stranger? The worst part wasn't even the cheating. It was realizing that while I'd been building what I thought was our life together, the dinner parties and the weekend trips and the plans for maybe starting a family next year, he'd been mentally checking out, calculating his escape velocity. How do you miss something like that? How do you not feel someone pulling away when they're lying right next to you? I asked him if he loved her. The question felt like swallowing glass. His hesitation was the only honest thing he'd given me in months. 3 days later, he moved out. Left me with a house full of memories that no longer matched reality and a closet half empty like some heavy-handed metaphor. I called in sick to work for a week. Drank too much wine. Didn't shower enough. Cried until my face was permanently puffy, like my body was storing grief in my cheeks for later use. My friends did that rotation thing they do, taking turns bringing casseroles and sitting on my couch making sympathetic noises while I cycled through rage and despair like flipping TV channels. They told me I'd be better off, that I deserved more. That time would heal this wound. All the things people say when they don't know what else to offer. But here's what no one tells you about having your heart broken. It makes you a detective of your own past. I went through photos, texts, emails, calendar entries, searching for clues I must have missed. When did it start? What vacation was he actually with her on? Which late nights at work were lies? I found myself creating a timeline of my own humiliation. January 17th. He said he had a work dinner, but his location showed him across town. February 22nd. He bought cologne he never wore around me. March 3rd, that unexplained charge at a hotel restaurant when he was supposedly out with his brother. It was like watching a movie where everyone knows the twist ending but you. One night, about 3 weeks into my new life as the woman Derek left, I found myself stalking Brittany's social media. This is self-harm in the digital age, scrolling through the carefully curated life of the woman your husband decided was better than you. Her teeth were very white, her yoga poses very bendy. Her captions very spiritual for someone building her happiness on the rubble of my marriage. But then I saw him in one of her photos. Nothing explicit, just in the background at what looked like a restaurant. His hand on her lower back. The same proprietary gesture he used to guide me through doors and crowded rooms. And something in me just snapped. Not in the going crazy way, more in the breaking free way, like a fever breaking. I looked at this man I'd spent a decade loving, and for the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt something other than pain. I felt disgust, and underneath that, something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Something that felt dangerously like purpose. Because in that photo, I also noticed something else. An older man sitting across from them, looking uncomfortable but trying to smile. Distinguished. Silver at the temples. Familiar in a way I couldn't place. The caption read, "Dinner with Dad. So happy two of my favorite men finally met." I stared at that man's face for a long time. At the way his smile didn't reach his eyes. At the way he was looking at his daughter and the man who had thrown away his marriage to be with her. And just like that, a very bad idea began to take shape in my mind. A very bad, very satisfying idea. I closed the laptop and actually laughed out loud in my empty house. The sound was rusty, like I'd forgotten how it worked. But it felt good. It felt like waking up. I went to the bathroom and really looked at myself for the first time in weeks. The woman in the mirror was pale, with dark circles under her eyes and hair that needed washing. But there was something new in her expression. Something calculating. "Hello," I whispered to my reflection. "Where have you been?" I showered, washed my hair, put on actual clothes instead of the rotation of sweatpants I'd been living in, made coffee instead of pouring wine. And then I sat down at my laptop and did something I never thought I would do. I looked up Richard Wilson, Brittany's father, successful real estate developer, divorced 3 years ago, 53 years old, owner of a boat and a beach house and, according to his company profile, a black Labrador named Captain. I stared at his photo for a long time, noting the kindness in his eyes that his daughter hadn't inherited, the slight sadness around the mouth that spoke of his own losses, the strong hands folded on his desk, and I began to plan. Not revenge exactly. Something more elegant than that. Something that would give me back what had been taken from me, but better. Upgraded. I'm not proud of what I did next. Or maybe I am. Maybe pride is exactly what I felt as I closed my laptop and reached for my phone, scrolling to the number of my friend who worked at Wilson Development Group. "Hey, Jen," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Remember that job opening you mentioned? I think I'm ready for a change." The universe had handed me an opportunity, and I was going to take it. After all, if Derek could rewrite our story, why couldn't I? So began the most calculated 6 months of my life. If he wanted younger, I'd take older. If he wanted carefree, I'd take established. If he was going to trade down, I was definitely going to trade up. And if that trade just happened to include the most exquisite form of karmic justice, well, that was just a bonus. I didn't know then if I could pull it off. If I was capable of the kind of long game I was contemplating, if I had it in me to follow through on a plan that would either heal me or break me further. But as I fell asleep that night, in clean sheets, with clean hair, breathing more easily than I had in weeks, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, replacing the dread that had become my constant companion. Tomorrow would be the first day of my new life. The first step in a journey that would either be the biggest mistake of my life or the most satisfying victory I'd ever known. Either way, I was done being the woman who got left. It was time to become the woman who got even. It's amazing how spite can be such an effective motivator. 3 weeks after finding those messages, I was showered, dressed in something other than emotional wreckage, and sitting in the reception area of Wilson Development Group with a resume that I'd spent 2 days polishing to perfection. The interview wasn't even the hard part. The hard part was convincing myself I deserved something good after Derek had so thoroughly convinced me I wasn't enough. But spite is a hell of a drug, and the thought of his face when he realized what I was planning kept me going through the nervous sweats and outfit changes. Is it petty to get a job at your ex-husband's new girlfriend's father's company just to orchestrate an elaborate revenge scheme? Absolutely. Did that stop me? Not even for a second. Richard Wilson wasn't supposed to be part of my interview. I was applying for a mid-level marketing position, expecting to meet with HR and maybe a department manager. But fate has a twisted sense of humor, and halfway through my conversation with a woman named Melissa, the door opened and in walked the man himself. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, and his voice was deeper than I'd expected. "I was walking by and heard marketing talk. Mind if I sit in?" I'd seen his pictures online, of course. Had studied them like I was preparing for an exam. But photos didn't capture the way he filled a room, not with Derek's obvious try-hard charm, but with something more substantial. Gravity, maybe, the kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. He settled into a chair, and I became acutely aware of my nervous hands, my carefully selected outfit, the way my heart was suddenly attempting to escape through my throat. "Please," I managed, "I'd appreciate your perspective." For 45 minutes, I talked about my experience, my ideas, what I could bring to Wilson Development, all while hyper-aware of Richard's thoughtful nods, his direct questions, the way his eyes, so like his daughter's but somehow kinder, never left my face when I spoke. It was the most present I'd felt in weeks, the most like myself. When the interview ended, Richard stood and extended his hand. "It was a pleasure meeting you," he said, and I couldn't tell if he meant it or if that's just what CEOs say to everyone. His handshake was firm, but not that crushing grip some men use to prove something. Just a hand holding another hand for exactly the right amount of time. I found myself noticing weird details like that. The clean line of his nails, the single platinum band on his right ring finger, not wedding, I'd checked. The way his suit fit like it had been made for him, which it probably had. "The pleasure was mine," I replied, and was surprised to realize I actually meant it. As I was gathering my things, he paused at the door. "We have a company dinner this Friday. Team building, very casual. If you'd like to come, it might be a good way to meet everyone. No pressure." "Oh," I said, genuinely startled, "but I don't even know if I got the job yet." He smiled, and it changed his whole face. Made him look younger, more mischievous. "Let's just say I have a good feeling." And that's how I found myself 3 days later, with the job offer in my inbox and a reservation at Bistro Laurent, trying to decide what very casual meant when your new boss, who happens to be your revenge target, invites you to dinner. I settled on a simple black dress that my friend Kate once described as first date appropriate but not trying too hard. Added a silver necklace. Heels I could actually walk in. A slash of red lipstick that felt like armor. The person in the mirror looked like me, but a version from before Derek had hollowed me out. I took a picture of myself and stared at it, wondering if I looked like the kind of woman who plans elaborate revenge scenarios, wondering if Richard would see right through me the moment I opened my mouth. The restaurant was one of those places with mood lighting and exposed brick walls and waiters who introduced themselves by name. Richard was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table toward the back, nursing what looked like whiskey. Alone. "Where is everyone else?" I asked as I approached, looking around for the promised company gathering. He stood, the automatic courtesy revealing his generation, and had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "About that, there was a slight change of plans. The team dinner got moved to next week." He hesitated. "I should have called to let you know, but I thought you might still want to have dinner to discuss the position in more detail. The position we'd already discussed thoroughly in my interview. The position I'd already accepted via email that morning. I should have left. Any reasonable person would have seen this for what it probably was, a man in a position of power testing boundaries with a new female employee. But I wasn't being reasonable. I was being calculated. So I sat down, ordered a gin and tonic to match his whiskey, and thought, game on. "So," he said after we'd ordered, "tell me something that wasn't on your resume." It caught me off guard, this deviation from professional small talk. "Like what?" "Like anything. Something real." "I already know your work history." I took a sip of my drink to buy time, considered telling him something safe and boring, but then I heard myself say, "I'm recently divorced." "Well, separated. The divorce isn't final yet." His eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression remained neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that. Recent enough that it still hurts? Recent enough that I sometimes forget and buy groceries for two?" I said, aiming for light but landing somewhere closer to raw. "What about you? Your company bio mentions a divorce." 3 years ago." He nodded. "Amicable enough, but still a failure by any measure. We share a daughter." I nearly choked on my drink but recovered. "Children make it harder, I imagine." "And better," he said. She's the best thing that came from the marriage. Though she's making some questionable decisions lately. A shadow crossed his face, and I just knew, he was thinking about Derek and Brittany. The waiter arrived with our appetizers, saving me from having to respond. As we ate, the conversation drifted to safer topics. Books we'd read recently, his passion project renovating an old sailboat, my abandoned hobby of photography that I'd let slip away during my marriage. "Why did you stop?" he asked, genuinely curious. I pushed my food around my plate. Derek, my ex, didn't really get it. Said it was a waste of time unless I was going to make money from it. Richard's expression darkened slightly. Some men are threatened by their partners having passions that don't include them. Speaking from experience? I asked, bolder now from the gin and the strange intimacy of sharing a meal with this man who should have been just my boss. Let's just say my ex-wife's decision to pursue her MBA was the beginning of the end for us. He smiled ruefully. I wasn't as evolved then as I like to think I am now. At least you recognize it, I said. Some men never do. As the dinner progressed, I found myself doing less calculating and more actual talking. Richard was surprisingly easy to talk to, thoughtful, funny in a dry way that snuck up on you, interested in what I had to say. He asked questions and then actually listened to the answers, a novelty after years with Derek, who treated conversations like competitions he had to win. By dessert, which we agreed to split, a chocolate thing that was more art than food, I was having an uncomfortable realization. I liked Richard Wilson, not just as a means to an end, but as a person. He was smart and kind and had that perfect balance of confidence and humility that Derek had always tried to fake. This was not part of the plan. The plan was to use Richard to hurt Derek and Brittany. The plan was not to enjoy his company, or notice the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed or feel flattered when he remembered details from earlier in our conversation. When the check came, he insisted on paying. "Company dinner," he said with a wink. "I'm still your boss, even if everyone else bailed." "About that," I said, suddenly sobering. "Is this appropriate? Me having dinner alone with my new boss?" He considered the question seriously. "Probably not. But I'm old enough to admit when I've made a mistake, and pretending this was still a company function was one. The truth is, I enjoyed our interview conversation and wanted to continue it." He looked me directly in the eyes. "If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand completely, and it won't affect your position at the company." I believed him, which was the truly dangerous part. "It doesn't make me uncomfortable," I said carefully. "But it does make me curious about your intentions." He smiled, and it was a different smile than before, less professional, more personal. "I'm not sure of them myself. Ask me again sometime and maybe I'll have figured it out." As we walked out of the restaurant, the night air cool against my flushed cheeks, he asked if I needed a ride home. I declined, not quite ready to let him know where I lived, not quite trusting myself. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "And for the job." "You earned the job," he replied. "The dinner was just a bonus." He hesitated, then added, "For both of us, I hope." And then he was gone, walking toward the parking lot, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my revenge plan in shambles around my feet. Because how was I supposed to use a man I was starting to genuinely like? How was I supposed to maintain my righteous anger when he'd just spent 2 hours reminding me what it felt like to be seen and heard and valued? I took an Uber home and poured myself a nightcap, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions. The rational part of me knew I should abandon this scheme, find another way to move on that didn't involve deceiving a decent man. But then I opened Instagram and there they were, Derek and Brittany, posed on a beach somewhere, his arms around her waist, her head thrown back laughing. The caption read, "When you know, you just know, your blessed drawer couple goals." My hand tightened around my glass until I thought it might shatter. This was the man who'd promised me forever and then discarded me like I was nothing. This was the girl who'd happily helped him do it, who was now flaunting their relationship online when the divorce papers weren't even signed yet. And just like that, my resolve hardened again. Richard Wilson might be a good man. He might be kind and interesting and attractive in a way that had nothing to do with my plans for him. But he was also my ticket to the kind of revenge that would cut Derek and Brittany to the core. I could like Richard and still use him. I could enjoy his company while advancing my agenda. I could compartmentalize. At least, that's what I told myself as I fell asleep that night, the memory of his smile following me into my dreams. My first week at Wilson Development passed in a blur of new faces, systems to learn, and careful navigation of my complicated feelings toward the company's founder. Richard kept things professionally cordial at work, nodding hello in the halls, stopping by my desk occasionally with questions that actually needed asking. If anyone noticed the subtle current running between us, they didn't mention it. On Friday, there actually was a team dinner, a dozen of us at a casual Italian place with Richard at the head of the table, making sure everyone felt included. I watched him with marketing eyes, analyzing what made him so effective as a leader, trying to separate my professional assessment from my personal interest. But when he walked me to my car afterward, lingering just a moment too long in the darkened parking lot, neither of us was thinking about work. "I'd like to see you this weekend," he said simply. Not as your boss. The smart move would have been to take it slow, to consider all the complications, to remember my actual agenda. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'd like that too." We went sailing on his boat, a restored wooden beauty he'd been working on for years. Out on the water, with the sun warming my skin and the wind tangling my hair, Richard talked about his divorce, his relationship with Brittany, his hopes for the future. "She's dating someone new," he said as he adjusted a line. "Someone completely wrong for her. But you can't tell a 23-year-old anything." My heart stuttered. "What makes him wrong for her?" Richard's expression clouded. "He's older. Way older. Recently separated himself." His hands tightened on the wheel. "The kind of man who uses a younger woman to make himself feel better about his own failures." The irony nearly knocked me overboard. Here I was, using the father to get back at the daughter and her boyfriend, while he worried about his daughter being used by an older man. We were trapped in some Greek tragedy of our own making, and only I knew all the parts. "You can't choose who your children love," I said carefully, "even when their choices hurt to watch." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in his expression shifted. "You understand more than you let on, don't you?" I shrugged, turning to watch the shoreline recede. I've made my share of bad relationship choices, and had people try to talk me out of them. Did it work? The talking? Never, I admitted. I had to make my own mistakes. He nodded slowly. "That's what I'm afraid of." The day on the water turned into dinner at his house, a stunning contemporary overlooking the bay, all glass and steel and warm wood. He cooked for me, nothing fancy but thoughtfully prepared. We drank good wine and talked about everything except work and our complicated romantic histories. It was the most normal I'd felt in months. The most like myself. When he kissed me goodnight at my car, it was gentle and brief. A question more than a demand. His hand cupped my face like I was something precious, and for a moment I forgot all about revenge and schemes and Derek and Brittany. For a moment I was just a woman being kissed by a man who saw her value. "I'd like to do this again," he said softly. Yes, I agreed, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with my original plan. That night I lay awake staring at my ceiling, trying to untangle the web I'd woven. I'd started this to hurt Derek and Brittany, to make them feel a fraction of the pain and humiliation they'd caused me, to take back some power in a situation where I'd been made to feel utterly powerless. But somewhere along the way it had become about Richard himself, about the way he listened, about his quiet confidence and hidden vulnerabilities, about the person I was when I was with him, not Derek's discarded wife or Brittany's unwitting victim, but someone worthy on my own terms. I told myself I could have both, the revenge and the relationship. That one didn't necessarily negate the other. That maybe, just maybe, this complicated path was exactly where I was meant to be all along. But as weeks turned into months, as casual dating evolved into something more serious, as Richard's house began to feel more like home than my own empty one, the lines I'd drawn for myself became increasingly blurred. I started accidentally, leaving things at his place, a toothbrush, a book, my favorite coffee mug. He cleared out a drawer for me without being asked, gave me a key for convenience. We settled into routines, Sunday brunches on his deck, occasional weeknight dinners when work allowed, lazy mornings in his ridiculously comfortable bed, and all the while, the clock was ticking toward the inevitable moment when our separate worlds would collide. When Richard would want me to meet Brittany, when Derek would discover who exactly his girlfriend's father was dating, when my careful house of cards would either stand strong or collapse entirely, I knew I should tell Richard the truth before that happened. Explain how we'd really connected, what had initially driven me to apply at his company. Give him the chance to decide if what we'd built was strong enough to withstand its tainted foundation. But every time I tried to find the words, I imagined his expression changing from affection to disgust. I imagined losing not just my revenge, but also this man who had somehow become essential to me. So I kept silent and kept dating him and kept falling deeper into what I could no longer pretend was just an elaborate scheme. 4 months into our relationship, as we lay tangled in his sheets on a lazy Sunday morning, Richard propped himself up on one elbow and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I want you to meet my daughter," he said. And just like that, all my borrowed time ran out at once. "Your daughter," I repeated, my mouth suddenly dry. "Brittany," he nodded. "She's been asking about the woman who's been making me so happy lately." His fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder. "I think it's time, don't you?" I thought about Derek's face when he walked into whatever restaurant Richard was planning for this introduction. Thought about Brittany realizing exactly who her father had been dating all these months. Thought about the spectacular, catastrophic explosion that would follow. It should have felt like victory, the perfect culmination of my revenge plot, finally within reach. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump without knowing what waited below. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my head. "I think it's time." Richard smiled and kissed me, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Great. I'll set it up for next weekend. Nothing fancy, just dinner at Marcello's?" Marcello's, where Derek had proposed to me 10 years earlier. The universe really does have a twisted sense of humor. I smiled back at Richard, pushing down the panic and guilt threatening to overwhelm me. Perfect. I can't wait to meet her. And as he pulled me close again, I realized I'd reached the point of no return. In 1 week, everything would change. In 1 week, I would either lose everything or win in a way I never could have anticipated. In 1 week, my revenge would finally be complete. I just wasn't sure anymore if that's what I actually wanted. The week before the dinner crawled by with excruciating slowness. I'd find myself zoning out during meetings, mentally rehearsing different versions of what might happen when Derek and Brittany realized who I was, who I'd become in their absence. Would Derek go pale, like he had the night I discovered his messages? Would Brittany recognize me from photos she must have seen during their affair? Would Richard sense the undercurrents before anything was said, or would the revelation hit him as hard as it was going to hit everyone else? I played through every scenario, from screaming matches to dignified exits to complete denial. I imagined myself cool and collected, dropping the truth like a bomb and walking away unscathed. I imagined myself breaking down, the months of suppressed pain finally finding release. What I couldn't imagine was a version where I didn't lose Richard in the process. By Friday morning, I was a mess of jangling nerves poorly disguised as a functioning adult. I must have changed outfits 7 times before work, trying to find something that said both, "I've completely moved on," and "Look what you gave up, asshole." I settled on a navy dress Richard had once said brought out my eyes, paired with heels that added 3 inches to my height and approximately 40% to my confidence. Hair down, makeup subtle but deliberate. The kind of effort that doesn't look like effort. Richard texted around noon. "Looking forward to tonight. Brittany's excited to meet you." My stomach clenched. Of course she was excited. She had no idea who she was about to meet. And that's when it hit me. She really didn't know. In all these months of dating Richard, of careful social media management and using only my first name at work, neither Derek nor Brittany had any clue that Richard's new girlfriend was the woman Derek had discarded, which meant I still had a choice. I could cancel the dinner, break things off with Richard with some invented excuse, walk away before the collision I'd set in motion months ago, or I could show up and play dumb, pretend the connection was coincidental, act shocked to see Derek there, let the chips fall where they may, or I could tell Richard the truth right now, before anyone else got hurt, confess my original motives, throw myself on his mercy, hope that what we'd built was strong enough to withstand this test. None of the options felt good. All of them involved pain, mine or his or both. By 6 p.m., I was sitting in my car outside Marcello's, gripping the steering wheel like it might try to escape, still undecided. The restaurant's familiar facade loomed before me, windows glowing golden in the early evening light. Through the glass, I could see tables of happy diners, oblivious to the drama about to unfold in their midst. My phone chimed with a text from Richard. "We're here, got a table in the back. Take your time." Take your time. As if that was an option anymore. I checked my reflection one last time in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed calmer than I felt, her eyes clear, her expression composed. She looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I wished I could borrow her certainty. With a deep breath that did nothing to settle the riot in my chest, I got out of the car and walked toward the restaurant. Each step felt ceremonial somehow, like a bride walking down an aisle or a condemned prisoner approaching the gallows. The maitre d' smiled in recognition. I'd been a regular here once, in another life. "Welcome back," he said, and I wondered if he remembered the night Derek had gone down on one knee right by the fountain in the corner, if he was thinking about how cyclical fate can be. "I'm meeting someone," I managed to say. "Richard Wilson?" "Of course. Right this way." He led me through the familiar dining room, past the fountain, still tinkling away, marking time like nothing had changed, toward a booth at the back. I couldn't see the occupants yet, just the back of a silver head that I recognized as Richard's. 3 more steps. 2. 1. And then I was there, standing at the edge of the table, looking down at 3 faces in various stages of recognition. Richard, smiling warmly, already half rising to greet me. Brittany, pretty in a youthful way that made my chest ache, her expression curious but friendly. And Derek, whose face went from polite interest to shock to horror in the span of 2 seconds. Derek, who actually made a small choking sound as our eyes met. Derek, who looked exactly the same and also somehow diminished, like a movie you loved as a child that doesn't hold up to adult scrutiny. "You're late," he said stupidly, as if we had planned to meet, as if I was still someone who owed him punctuality. Richard looked between us, confusion creasing his brow. "You two know each other?" The moment stretched, pregnant with possibilities. I could feel multiple futures branching off from this single point in time, like roads diverging in a forest. The path I chose now would determine everything that followed. I looked at Brittany, whose expression was transitioning from confusion to dawning understanding as she glanced between me and Derek. I looked at Richard, who deserved better than all of us. And I made my choice. Know each other? I let out a laugh that didn't sound entirely stable. "You could say that?" I slid into the seat beside Richard, directly across from Derek, whose complexion had gone the color of old putty. "Derek and I were married for 10 years. Until he left me for your daughter." Silence fell over the table like a dropped curtain. Complete, absolute silence, where I could hear the blood rushing in my ears and the distant conversations from other tables and the goddamn fountain still tinkling away in the background. Richard went very still beside me. I couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see whatever was happening on his face. "What?" Brittany was the first to recover, her voice high and thin. "Dad, what is she talking about?" "I'd like to know that myself," Richard said quietly. I risked a glance at him then and found his expression carefully blank, his eyes focused not on me but on Derek, who was now fidgeting with his water glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Richard," Derek started, then stopped, swallowed hard. "There's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" I asked, finding a strange calm descending over me now that the moment had arrived. "Am I misunderstanding something, Derek? Were we not married for a decade? Did you not leave me for a woman 15 years younger after I found your messages on your laptop?" Messages to Brittany here, who you were quite creatively sexting while lying next to me in our bed. Brittany made a small, distressed sound. "He told me you were already separated when we met. He said it was over months before." "Of course he did." "Well, that would have been news to me since we were still having regular date nights and planning a trip to Mexico when I found out." I turned to Richard, finally forcing myself to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry. I should have told you before now." His expression gave nothing away. "Yes," he said evenly. "You should have." Derek, desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage, leaned forward. "Look, this is just a weird coincidence. We can be adults about this." "A coincidence?" Richard interrupted, and there was a dangerous edge to his voice I'd never heard before. "You think it's a coincidence that I'm dating your ex-wife?" And there it was. The question that would expose everything. I took a breath. Considered lying, considered telling a sanitized version of the truth. Instead, I looked Richard directly in the eyes and said, "It wasn't a coincidence. I saw Brittany's Instagram post with you in it. I knew exactly who you were when I applied for the job at your company. I wanted revenge." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Richard's eyes widened slightly, the only indication that my words had landed. "You planned this?" Brittany's voice cracked. "What kind of psycho—" "The kind who had her life blown apart without warning." I cut in, still holding Richard's gaze. "But that's not the whole story." "I think I've heard enough," Derek said, starting to slide out of the booth. "This is insane. I'm not sitting here for this." Richard's hand shot out, gripping Derek's wrist with enough force to make him wince. Sit down. Each word was carved from ice. You don't get to walk away from this one. Derek slowly sank back into his seat, a flush creeping up his neck. Continue, Richard said to me, releasing Derek's wrist. I swallowed hard. I did plan it initially. I wanted to hurt you both the way you hurt me. I looked between Derek and Brittany. I thought dating Richard would be the perfect revenge. But then, I turned back to Richard, willing him to understand. Then I got to know you, and everything changed. What started as revenge became real, more real than anything I'd felt in years. Richard's expression didn't soften, but something flickered in his eyes. When were you going to tell me? I don't know, I admitted. I kept finding reasons to put it off. I was afraid of losing you. So you were just going to keep lying? Brittany demanded. String my dad along as part of some sick revenge fantasy? You don't get to claim the moral high ground here. I snapped, my composure finally cracking. You knowingly slept with a married man? My husband. You participated in destroying something that took me a decade to build. He told me you were already... I know what he told you, I interrupted. And maybe you believed him because it was convenient to believe him. But ask yourself this. If he lied to me for months while we were married, what makes you think he isn't lying to you too? Derek's face darkened. That's enough. You've made your point. You've embarrassed everyone. Are you happy now? Happy? I repeated, the word tasting strange in my mouth. No, Derek, I'm not happy. I'm not happy that I wasted 10 years with someone who could discard me without a second thought. I'm not happy that I let my pain drive me to deceive a good man. I looked at Richard. And I'm not happy that I might lose the best thing that's happened to me in years because I couldn't let go of what you did. This is ridiculous, Derek muttered. Richard, man, I'm sorry you got caught in the crossfire of my ex-wife's vendetta. Don't, Richard said sharply. Don't presume to speak for me or about her. He turned to his daughter. Did you know that he was still with her when you started seeing him? Brittany's eyes darted to Derek, then back to her father. He said they were separated. Living apart. We were not, I said quietly. Not even close. Richard nodded slowly, absorbing this. I see. The waiter chose that moment to approach our table, smiling brightly. Are we ready to order? The absurdity of the moment, the four of us sitting there in the smoldering remains of our relationships while this poor man asked about appetizers, was almost too much. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, slightly hysterical. We need a few more minutes, Richard told him, somehow maintaining a veneer of normalcy. After the waiter retreated, Richard placed both hands flat on the table, a gesture that commanded attention. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice controlled but vibrating with suppressed emotion. Derek, you and Brittany are going to leave. I need to speak with... He paused, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. With my girlfriend. Alone. Dad, Brittany protested. You can't be serious. After what she just admitted? Now, Brittany, Richard said, in a tone that brooked no argument. Derek looked like he might object, but something in Richard's expression made him think better of it. He slid out of the booth, Brittany reluctantly following. This isn't over, Derek said to me, trying for menacing but landing closer to petulant. Oh, it's been over, I replied. You just didn't bother to inform me at the time. After they left, the silence between Richard and me grew thick enough to choke on. I stared at the candle flickering between us, unable to meet his eyes. So, he finally said, your ex-husband is dating my daughter. Yes. And you knew this all along. Yes. And you pursued me deliberately, as some sort of elaborate revenge scheme. I winced at the bluntness of it. That was how it started, I acknowledged. But it's not how it continued. It's not what it became. Richard sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. Do you have any idea how difficult it is for me to trust people? After my divorce? After years of people approaching me for what I can give them rather than who I am? I do now, I whispered. And I hate that I've become part of that pattern for you. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me across the table. The irony is, he finally said, I've never felt as understood by anyone as I have by you these past months. Hope flickered, fragile as the candle flame between us. Because it was real, I said urgently. What happened between us? What's still happening? It started from a dark place, but it grew into something I never expected. Something I couldn't have planned. How can I believe that? He asked, and the genuine pain in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. How can I separate what was strategy from what was sincere? I reached across the table, not quite touching him, my hand hovering in the space between us. Ask me anything. About any moment we've shared. I'll tell you what I was thinking, what I was feeling. No more lies. Richard looked at my outstretched hand, then at my face. Something in his expression shifted, softened. The first time we went sailing, he said, when you told me about giving up photography because your ex didn't support it. Was that true? Yes, I said immediately. All of it. I used to love taking pictures. Landscapes mostly, some portraits. Derek thought it was a waste of time unless I was going to monetize it somehow. And when you stayed over that first night and you cried in your sleep, I swallowed hard, remembering. Also real. I was dreaming about finding those messages. About the moment I realized my marriage was a lie. He nodded slowly. What about what you said last weekend? About maybe moving in together eventually? The truest thing I've ever said to you, I whispered. I want that future. I want you. Richard reached out then, covering my hand with his. The contact sent warmth rushing up my arm, relief making me lightheaded. I'm still angry, he said quietly. And hurt. And I have no idea what happens next. I know. My daughter is dating your ex-husband. I know that too. This is possibly the most complicated relationship situation I've ever encountered. Despite everything, I felt a smile tugging at my lips. It does have a certain soap opera quality to it. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. To say the least. He squeezed my hand once, then released it, sitting back in his seat. I need time to process all this. To decide if what we have is strong enough to survive its origins. I nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. I understand. But, he continued, I'm not walking away. Not yet. Not without giving us a chance to figure this out. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it was almost painful. Thank you, I managed. For even considering. Don't thank me yet, he warned. I'm not making any promises. And we have a lot to discuss, including how we handle the Derek and Brittany situation going forward. Right. The Derek and Brittany situation. The original reason for all of this. Strangely, in the heat of the moment, I'd almost forgotten about them. My focus had narrowed to Richard and whether I was going to lose him, the revenge aspect receding into the background like radio static. I don't know if they'll stay together after this, I said truthfully. Derek doesn't handle public embarrassment well. Richard's expression darkened. I hope for my daughter's sake that they don't. He's not good enough for her. On that, I said with feeling, we are in complete agreement. Something close to a genuine smile crossed his face. Well, it's a start. We ended up ordering food after all, though neither of us had much appetite. We talked, cautiously at first, then with increasing honesty as the initial shock wore off. I told him about finding Derek's messages, about the weeks of pain that followed, about how seeing Brittany's Instagram post had sparked the idea of revenge. He told me about his complicated relationship with his daughter, his fears that she was making the same mistakes her mother had made, his guilt over not being more present during her formative years. By the time we finished our barely touched dessert, something had shifted between us. Not back to what we had been, we couldn't unknow what had been revealed, but perhaps toward something new, something with a foundation of difficult truth rather than comfortable lies. Outside the restaurant, standing in the cool night air, Richard took my hands in his. I'm going home alone tonight, he said gently. I need space to think. I nodded, fighting back disappointment. I understand. But I'll call you tomorrow, he added. We'll talk more then. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to, a thread of possibility stretching into the future. As I watched him walk to his car, I realized something strange had happened tonight. In seeking revenge for what Derek had taken from me, I'd found something I hadn't been looking for, a chance at genuine love. And in the process of exposing the truth, I'd set myself free from the past in a way that my revenge scheme never could have. Derek's betrayal had broken something in me, but perhaps Richard, and my own painful honesty, could help rebuild it into something stronger. I drove home alone through quiet streets, replaying the night's events, wondering what tomorrow would bring. My phone stayed silent. No texts from Richard, no angry messages from Derek or Brittany. Just silence and the sound of my thoughts. At home, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a generous glass of wine, stood at my kitchen window looking out at the night sky, feeling oddly weightless. The revenge I'd planned for months had finally played out, but not at all as I'd imagined. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel was replaced by something more complex. Relief, hope, anxiety, all swirling together. My phone chimed, startling me. I lunged for it, hoping it was Richard, but instead found a text from Derek. We need to talk. This isn't over. I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering how those words from him used to send me into a tailspin of anxiety, how much power he had held over my emotions for so long. But now they were just words on a screen from a man who no longer mattered. I deleted the message without responding and turned my phone off. Whatever Derek wanted to say could wait. Whatever he thought wasn't over had ended for me the moment I'd found the courage to tell Richard the truth. The moment I'd chosen honesty over revenge. As I crawled into bed that night, alone but somehow not lonely, I realized that the real revenge hadn't been dating Richard at all. It had been finding my way back to myself, stronger, wiser, and finally free from the shadow of Derek's betrayal. The rest was just details. I closed my eyes, waiting for tomorrow and whatever it might bring. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. Richard called the next morning, as promised. Just hearing his voice sent my heart into overdrive, a reaction I'd become so accustomed to that I hadn't realized how much I'd miss it if it disappeared. "We should talk in person," he said. "Are you free this afternoon?" 4 hours later, I was sitting on a bench in the botanical gardens, watching Richard approach with 2 coffees and an unreadable expression. He handed me one without speaking, then sat down beside me, leaving a careful distance between us. For a while, we just sipped our drinks and watched a pair of elderly women argue gently over plant identification several yards away. "I talked to Brittany this morning," Richard finally said. "It appears she and Derek had quite the discussion after leaving the restaurant." My stomach tightened. And she's beginning to see some patterns she'd previously been blind to. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "She asked me a lot of questions about him. About men who leave long marriages for significantly younger women. About what that might indicate about his character." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That in my experience, men who trade in their wives for younger models are running from something within themselves. That the problem is rarely the wife and almost always the man's own fear of aging, of irrelevance, of mortality." I nodded slowly. "And did she listen?" "I think so," he sighed, rubbing his temple. "She's young, but she's not stupid, just inexperienced. Trusting." "I was trusting too once," I said quietly. "Before Derek." Richard looked at me then. Really looked at me. "And now? Are you still capable of trust?" The question hung between us, weighted with all its implications. "I want to be," I answered honestly. "I'm trying to be." He nodded, seeming to accept this. "I've been thinking all night about what you told me, about how this started versus what it became." I held my breath, waiting. "I'm still angry," he continued. "Not just at you, but at the whole situation. At Derek for hurting you so badly that revenge seemed like the only path forward. At my daughter for being so easily deceived. At myself for not seeing what was right in front of me. I'm sorry," I said again, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. "I know you are." He set his coffee down, turning fully toward me. "But here's the thing. When I try to imagine walking away from you, from what we've built these past months, it feels wrong. Like I'd be punishing us both for Derek's sins." Hope flickered in my chest, fragile as a candle flame. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try. To get past this. To see if what we have is strong enough to survive its complicated beginnings." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "I'm not promising it will be easy. There will be days when I remember how this started and feel angry all over again. Days when you'll have to be patient with me." "I can do patient," I said, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. "I can do whatever you need." "What I need," he said slowly, "is for us to start fresh. Complete honesty from now on. No more secrets." I nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. An open book." "Good." He reached for my hand then, his touch warming me from the inside out. Because despite everything, these last few months have been the happiest I've had in years. And I'm not quite ready to let that go. That afternoon marked the beginning of something new between us. Not a clean slate exactly, but a more honest foundation. We talked for hours, excavating truths we'd both been holding back. I told him about my lingering insecurities from Derek's betrayal, my fear of being replaced, discarded. He shared his own wounds from his marriage, his complicated feelings about aging in a world that values youth above all else. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, of retreat, of uncomfortable silence, but there was also laughter and understanding and the profound relief that comes from being truly seen and accepted anyway. As for Derek and Brittany, that story concluded with less drama than it began. 3 days after our disastrous dinner, Brittany called Richard to tell him she had broken things off with Derek. Apparently, my revelation had cracked the perfect image Derek had constructed, and once she started looking for cracks, the whole facade crumbled quickly. She discovered other lies about his finances, about his friends, about his plans for the future. She said she couldn't stop thinking about how he'd lied to you for months while you were still married. Richard told me, a certain satisfaction in his voice. Said it made her wonder what he might be lying to her about. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness for her. She's young. She'll find someone better. Yes, she will, Richard agreed. Someone her own age, preferably. Derek, for his part, didn't go quietly. He texted me repeatedly over the next week, his messages evolving from angry demands to talk, to self-pitying lamentations, to bizarre attempts at rekindling what we'd once had. I blocked his number after he suggested that perhaps our divorcing had been hasty, and we should remember the good times. The good times. As if they hadn't been retroactively poisoned by his betrayal, as if I hadn't already found something better. 2 months after the revelation at Marcello's, Richard and I were having dinner at his place when he suddenly put down his fork and looked at me with an expression that made my heart stutter. "Move in with me," he said simply. I blinked, caught off guard. "Are you sure?" "After everything?" "Because of everything," he corrected. "We've wasted enough time on the past. I want to start our future." 1 month after that, as we were unpacking the last of my boxes in what was now our home, Richard disappeared into his study and returned with a small velvet box. "I was going to plan some elaborate moment," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "But I think we've had enough drama, don't you?" Inside the box was a ring, not a traditional diamond, but a sapphire surrounded by smaller stones, elegant and unique. "I'm not asking for an answer right now," he said quickly. "Just think about it." I didn't need to think. 10 years of marriage to the wrong man had taught me to recognize the right one when he was standing in front of me, offering a future I'd stopped believing was possible. "Yes," I said, and watched his face transform with joy. "Absolutely yes." We decided to keep the engagement quiet at first, just enjoying the secret between us. But eventually, it was time to tell Brittany, who had been slowly warming up to me over cautious brunches and carefully neutral conversations. Her reaction surprised us both. After a moment of shock, she laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "This is so messed up," she said, shaking her head. "But also, kind of perfect? In a weird way?" Later, she pulled me aside when Richard was out of earshot. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I didn't know about you, about your marriage. I swear I didn't." "I believe you," I said, and found that I actually did. "And I'm glad," she continued a little awkwardly, "that you and Dad found each other. Even if the way it happened was unconventional. Unconventional. That was one way of putting it." The news of our engagement inevitably reached Derek. I heard through mutual friends that he'd been less than gracious about it, painting me as a calculating gold digger and himself as the victim of some grand conspiracy. But his opinion no longer mattered. His voice no longer had the power to drown out my own. Sometimes when Richard and I are out sailing or cooking dinner or simply existing in the comfortable quiet we've built together, I think about how strangely things worked out. How the worst betrayal of my life led me, through a twisting path of pain and revenge and unexpected love, to the best relationship I've ever known. After 10 years of marriage, Derek left me for a younger woman. But that wasn't the end of my story. It was just the messy beginning of a much better one. And as I plan my wedding to her dad, I can't help but think that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better.